Greetings, and welcome all to Digital Undivided's Diane Dinners. Diane Dinners is named after Digital Undivided's Project Diane report, the first ever research study to quantify the entrepreneurial experience of women of color founded startups in the United States. Since the inaugural release of the Project Diane report, Digital Undivided has documented the experiences of the founders on their startup journey, sparked a national dialogue about inclusive innovation, and even brought partners in the startup ecosystem together to discuss issues and co-create solutions. Diane Dinners allows us to have a broader reach for viewers at home as we bring together industry leaders to drive conversation about the challenges our Latina and Black women founders face within the ecosystem. Our goal is to elevate these issues to promote understanding and focus our collective efforts on scalable solutions. Now, you'll hear from some captivating and inspiring industry leaders and entrepreneurs who are innovating new industries, including Shannon Morales, founder of Trabaja, a talent marketplace and community for undersupported tech talent. Charlotte Newman, global head of underrepresented founders at Amazon Web Services. Erica Dijkman, general partner at Rain Ventures, a seed-stage consumer technology and software startups firm. Natasha Benskapal, co-founder and chief operating officer at Vega X Holding, an index-driven crypto asset management platform. During tonight's conversation, we will address the intersecting constraints experienced by women of color in the investment and startup space, the initiatives and programs designed to address the lack of diversity in tech, valuations, and more. So let's get into it.
And first marker.
Oh, so this is episode 1?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
The inaugural episode. Are you good?
Very exciting.
Charlotte, you get the honor of our first question. Can you tell me a little bit more about your experience in the investment space? What does it look like for Latina and Black women founders?
As you know, I currently lead Amazon Web Services startups, global work, the work that we do to accelerate underrepresented founders and investors. But what really informs the work that I do now are 2 prior experiences. That was one, being a former founder, graduating from Harvard Business School and having the experience where I could contrast what I was experiencing as a Black woman raising money with classmates who fared far differently. I would even tell me that they were having experiences where things were a lot easier. And I was like, that does not ring true for me.
Yeah.
But that in combination with also having been an economic advisor to a US senator who was on the small business committee and spending a lot of time looking at what it looks like to found startups and start small businesses around the country and opportunities to really level the playing field for founders really is a part of what's informed the work that I do now. And something that's really core to the work that I lead and how I think about this is that talent is, of course, distributed equally, but often opportunity is not. And when you're talking about entrepreneurship, capital is really the life's blood of being able to start and run businesses successfully. So I think it's, core to make sure that founders have access to the capital they need.
Absolutely. And, we know that equal opportunity does not guarantee equal outcome, but it's that equal opportunity that we're looking for, right?
Important. Absolutely.
Well, I have to give some love to this side of the table, of course. Now, following up on Charlotte's question, the both of you have raised capital in this space. So what were your experiences like? What opportunities were open to you and which weren't?
So when I was thinking about raising capital, I have a company that's more focused on social impact driven mission. I found that very often VCs didn't really understand the problem that we were trying to solve because it's very often tied to, my personal experiences as a woman, as an Afro-Latina of color. And so I looked for alternative routes of raising capital, whether, that was grant funding, whether that was accelerator programs. But for me, I realized that was more of the lane that I wanted to take as opposed to just going after VC capital.
Yeah, I think on my end, I think a lot of things reign true and something that I think Charlotte said, really hit the nail on the head, right? Imagine you do go to the Ivy League and you wear the same crest. Now imagine you do not go to an Ivy League and you are not wearing the same crest, but you're still fighting that same battle. So as you can imagine, it becomes increasingly more difficult if you aren't in these networks or you aren't introduced to these networks or asked to be a part of these networks. So that ends up becoming extremely difficult, I think, as you're raising capital, trying to find the pockets of people who are really putting their money behind what they say and how they move.
Exactly.
Yeah. Absolutely. We all know it's more than just a hashtag, right?
Definitely.
So, Erica, as a startup investor, organizational champion, what does the current market look like for these founders?
The venture capital market for about the last year has been extremely capital constrained for basically all venture-backed startups, with the exception of perhaps, a few that are focusing on sectors like AI, and maybe climate tech is still getting a bit funded. What we've seen is with rising interest rates, asset allocators are really pulling back their allocation to venture. And whereas there was, 330 billion committed a couple of years ago, we've seen the size of the market contract substantially. Part of that has to do with the fact that the folks that are making commitments to venture capital firms have to sort of rebalance their portfolios away from the really overinflated valuations that we saw over the last 5 to 10 years. And so what that means for startup founders is that it's much harder to get new investment because so many VCs, like Brain Ventures, are out there conserving their capital to make sure that their existing portfolio companies can survive. Because if we're investing at seed and A and the B capital is not forthcoming, we have to make sure we save some of that money so that our great companies can make it through this difficult time. The reason that the effect of interest rates is so important for startup founders who might not think that it affects them, right? It's like, oh, doesn't that have to do with bonds and mortgages? Is that when interest rates go up, essentially the present value of those future cash flows is diminished. And as a startup founder, you're basically selling cash flow that's not coming for another 5 to 10 years, if ever, right? But hopefully then. And so your valuation can go down substantially in the sort of environment where we see, a risk-free rate go from 0 to, 4 or 5. So it has a significant impact.
Erica, you brought up so many great points, and you spoke about the interest rates, and I want to go back to what you mentioned about these recent bank failures, right? Because it's incredibly scary for a founder, especially a woman of color founder who we already know is dealing with some additional challenges. What kind of impact is that having for the companies in your portfolio? What would be your words of wisdom to the founders who might be viewing this?
Well, great companies are founded in all economic environments, right? But I think as a founder, you just have to realize that, the sort of sentiment on the street right now is that you need to be able to do more with less. And given that, we're actually kind of in luck, right? We have so many great technologies coming online, particularly with AI and other tools that are available. We also have a lot of people losing their jobs at some of the big tech companies and becoming available tech talent that could maybe have been gotten for a little bit cheaper than maybe 3 or 4 years ago, or even, 2 to 3 years ago, when there was a very competitive environment for engineering talent and just labor in general. So hiring might be a little bit easier. You might have access to some new technology that'll allow you to leverage the resources that you do have a little bit better. But I do also want to reiterate the fact that as female founders and founders of color, we've always had to do more with less. So this might actually be an opportunity for us to have a competitive advantage over the other folks who are more resistant and not used to doing that.
Absolutely. They say necessity breeds innovation, right? But what we know is that women of color are experts in that. Natasha, you're an ops person, so I know doing more with less resonates with you, right? What have you been feeling from the current market shifts?
Yeah, I think everything Erica said is spot on. What we have, especially in my world, I'm in the fintech world. We have, the global financial economy that is, who knows, is the sentiment, right? The sentiment is what's happening. Then you add in a digital asset economy where, again, the sentiment is like, wait, what's happening? And then you add in companies trying to actively build in this space and needing capital in order to be able to build. So I think that you're seeing a lot of dynamics here of kind of this world of new economies being built, new markets being built. And again, it's kind of a breeding ground for innovation. But at the same token, there are issues with that, and there are barriers to that. And again, you're building something new. in a new world. So you need to find those people who have the conviction for new things, which already is not very easy. People are very hesitant to change. We were talking about this earlier. But there becomes a world where you can no longer be hesitant. And I think we're at that crux right now where, especially in the fintech world, it's very clear what the new age and the new economy of the digital world looks like. But the question now is, where do we place our bets? And I think that people have taken a step back where they were casting wide nets on these bets. Now they're being very focused and a bit hesitant on how they approach with the wide net, or being very focused, specifically because the dollars are drying up. People are reevaluating how they deploy. And as a result, people have to become more nimble, and you have to double down on your resources. So again, as Black women entrepreneurs, we've always, I think, built with less, right? But now it's a world of how do we continue to double down on that as a differentiator? And how do we double down on that as a strength as a resource and make that clear to investors? And that's what's hard, the difficulty in being able to communicate that. The hope is that your metrics and numbers speak for itself. The reality is that it doesn't, which is why a lot of the work needs to be done with this relationship building, communities, networks that folks can tap into, because it's a lot easier to have these conversations with people who are already head nodding, yes, I get it. It's a lot harder when you have to educate everyone on the gospel of why it's difficult and all of these other things, and then ask for money, right? So we kind of have a lot of steps to this ladder that we're constantly climbing up. But, you know, I'd like to say we don't get tired of climbing because we have to keep climbing. There's no choice, right? There isn't a choice of getting tired. You kind of just have to keep going. So I think that's the other piece of, but being a Black woman founder, working on resource constraints, is that you kind of have to continue to keep pushing, because the alternative is to no longer have a company and no longer be able to do these things, right? No longer employ people and no longer kind of be able to operate in this economy. And that's not a choice really for folks. So it kind of leaves you in this world of, you know, do or die.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, Natasha, you're in the world of fintech, and you mentioned founder market fit. I'm curious to know, what are some of the industry specific challenges that you're coming up against, and how have you dealt with them?
Yeah, on my end, is something that we talked about before in terms of, I think, the newness of an industry, and the infancy of an industry, I'd say. The barriers that we face in fintech are very similar to the barriers that I think everyone faces, especially as a Black woman founder. I'd like to say they're actually exasperated, because if we look at fintech investment, you have fintech investment, then you have minority fintech investment, then you have Black women fintech investment, and there aren't that many of us, and we're not getting funded. So the money is not trickling to where it says it's supposed to be going. But that's not new. Project Diane, like, I think it just nails it right there, right? Like, this is not a new trend. But the reality is, as we move into this new world or this new economy, technology ends up being inherently a part of almost every company. So we're moving into this world where now, you know, everything is inherently a technology company. So people now need to rethink what that means for their companies, right? If we're moving into this new world where everything is digital, the economy is digital, everyone is putting everything online, what does this mean for businesses that are traditionally brick and mortar? Will they need an online application? Mostly not necessarily, but there are these worlds that need to safe-proof for the future. And I think that those are kind of some of the barriers that we see. Always capital. We need the money. Fintech is an extremely expensive startup sector, industry, entrepreneur to take on, period. It's extremely capital intensive. So you do need to have the backing, and you don't necessarily have the run rate to let it run for years before you prove out results. You need to prove out results in months. We're not even talking years here, or even a year. So those kind of things are further exacerbated as we move into a world of a 24/7 digital economy where things don't turn off. So I think that that is a big barrier and something that we continue to face. And as I think the industry continues to grow, the hope is that it gets easier. And I think what we've at least seen now, I've been an entrepreneur for over 10 years now, always building in fintech. I'm a three-time entrepreneur here. And when I first started, we did not have communities like Digital Undivided. We didn't have many women of color communities, period. I'd like to say now what we're at least seeing is this emergence of micro communities building up. That makes me hopeful for the future. We're not there yet. Obviously, the stats are very clear. But I think as we start to see more folks like Shannon and I who are leading things, championing things, and trying to find our communities and hopefully try to build our own, you'll start to see, I think, many pieces of impact being made. And I think that as we continue to chip away at that, we'll be able to see longer term impact. In the long run, we're just not there yet, but we're making strides. So the more that we can support more Black female founders who are building and figuring out how we support them, I think the further we will go with this long-term mission of full-on support, so we can stop talking about the soundbite of the dollars aren't being allocated, or we could talk about the soundbite of, wow, look at how much money has actually been allocated to these type of founders. And I think it's extremely important.
Yeah.
Just, I don't know if you found this, but one of the resources I feel like founders don't often think about is to look at corporates. I know internally, some of the segments that we focus on for startups are fintech, health tech, AI and machine learning. And I know we have a number of corporate partners who have like resources that I think founders don't often think to tap into. So I don't know if you found that in your journey or how often you've kind of
all the
leveraged some
time, because
resources.
I think when we think about VC, VC ends up being difficult, and then you try to think about corporate, and then corporate has their own VC arm. And it might also actually be harder, as a matter of fact, because the corporate arm tends to have more guardrails and more barriers, I think, towards actually getting in. But the good thing about the corporate investment is that it is a very focused investment. They are very clear about what they want and what they need, and if you fit or not.
Right.
The VC side is a different gambit, where we can do the 30 meetings and still be unsure of what is happening here. On the corporate route, it's very clear. We're looking for this. Do you have this? Let's test it out and let's demo it and let's move forward. So I think it's an extremely viable route for capital. It's, I think, again, about making sure that interests align and that time is of the essence. So I think that those are kind of the two things that we see a lot, especially as we approach corporates that are focused on fintech innovations for digital assets.
Yeah, even in addition to capital, though, if I think about from the Amazon Web Services perspective, we've seen like fintech companies building our platform for 16 plus years.
Yeah.
Across every vertical, whether that's, payments, fintech companies, or lending. And so there's a lot of internal knowledge that you'll find within teams who have seen founders kind of build, launch, even IPO. In addition to kind of looking for those corporate venture checks, I think often founders also need to look for kind of the technical assistance they can get from people, whether it's at Amazon Web Services or even a corporate that's in financial services. Often they'll have internal resources that I think people just don't think to.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because, in our most recent Project Diane report that we released on International Women's Day this year, we highlighted some of the spaces where Black and Latina women are getting the most funding. And it's ed tech, it's fintech, health and wellness, and beauty. We all know, but I'm really interested in the financial services, the ed tech. What's really interesting about that is, as we're talking to investors, the number one thing we hear is, who's working on generative AI, right? That's exactly what we want. If they're pre-seed, do they have focus on generative AI? What are they doing in this space? Natasha, you spoke about it a little bit. Erica, you spoke about it. I'm curious to know, Erica, from your perspective as an early stage investor, specifically for tech companies, what do we say to someone watching who may not yet be on the generative AI train or may have a solution that's outside of that?
I think there's still hope for you, so don't worry about it. We have a couple companies in our portfolio that are focused on AI. One is, a true AI large language model company focused on the legal tech space. But, she started doing this like 2.5 years ago. So I think that, the people who are jumping on the bandwagon now are actually really reminding me of back in 1999, where everyone would throw a .com on the end of their company name, and all of a sudden the valuation would 10x overnight. And so I think that what we're going to see in the long term is that generative AI is going to become a utility, just like the internet, and everyone's going to be integrating it into how they do business and into their products, just the same way every business has a website or uses technology in some form these days. So if you can figure it out sooner rather than later, how it can help you, it's going to help you advance, but everyone's going to get up the learning curve at some point. And I also think that something that I've learned, particularly in my Kaufman Fellows experience from listening to a lot of really successful VCs, that, the most efficient way to make money as an investor is not just to be right, but also to be contrarian. So you can be right, but if everyone else sort of has the same viewpoint, it's very hard to end up making money. And I think that that's kind of where we are at this point in AI investing today. I think if you had, obviously invested in OpenAI or, whatever, your company a few years ago when there wasn't so much attention on the space and the valuations weren't being pushed up so much, and you have a bit of a head start, you could probably do really well. But I do think, it's actually sometimes a little bit scary to be in a sector where there's way too much money being thrown at it.
Yeah.
And this is something that you probably remember, Natasha, because for a while there was way too much money being thrown into fintech. And, all of a sudden now it's a bit like a barren desert.
Yeah.
So, I think that we might see a similar boom and bust actually happen within overvaluation of people who are simply using generative AI as the utility that it is, rather than truly sort of innovating in the technology.
Very interesting. And that concludes this Diane Dinners series. Thank you to all of our guests for their time and insights this evening. I know so many current and budding entrepreneurs, investors, and organizations are going to benefit from your experience, your wisdom, and your passion for this cause. We also want to thank our sponsors for this event and our Digital Undivided partners for helping us co-create scalable solutions supporting the growth and success of Latina and Black women entrepreneurs in the startup space.
For more information on Project Diane, visit digitalundivided.com/Project Diane.